Um, Thanks, Jenna. So I'm Ryan Davis with the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay. My colleague Rob Frank is here as well. And then our colleague Jenna Mackley is going to be doing all the background stuff for us. So thanks a lot, Jenna. Again, y'all, we're into year 3 here of Zoom life, Zoom world. So y'all know the drill. If you have questions, anything like that, go ahead and put them in the chat. We are planning on having a lot of time to answer those questions and have a nice discussion when we're done kind of with the 101 portion here of the presentation. Yeah, make sure you're muted if you're not already. And again, if you want to ask a question, when we're done, you can speak up then, or you can put it in the chat for now. And I'm going to check here. Let's see. Yeah, nothing I need to address yet in the chat. Feel free to go ahead and introduce yourself there too, if you feel like doing it. So, all right, well, let's get on into it. Yeah, live staking 101. This here is neither Rob or I. This is our colleague, Jim Kaufman. You'll be seeing him a little bit here over the course of this presentation. We're excited to talk about this now because we are gearing up for our own live staking season. Within a couple weeks, we'll be out there doing a lot of cutting. Rob and I are, really making sure we're ready for our shoulders, arms to be sore from all the cutting that we're doing. Now we'll just take it when it comes. We don't work out. We let the trees build our muscles for us. This is a good time of year for you to be starting to think about this and plan about this. Very simple technique that is really excellent way to achieve a little bit more restoration.
Only thing I do is a simple PowerPoint. Plans.
Oh, there we go. So before we kind of really jump into the meat of the presentation, who are we? What do we do? So the Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay, we've been around a little over 50 years now, which is pretty nuts. We cover the entire Bay watershed, all the way up into New York. We have programs and projects that touch every single jurisdiction in the watershed. Every state, and then also can't forget about Washington, D.C. We have 4 offices. Rob and I and Jenna work out of our Lancaster, PA office, and most of what we're going to talk about is a little bit keyed into PA, but you can do this anywhere that you find these shrubs in nature, these shrubs and trees. So what do we do? Well, obviously we want a clean and resilient Chesapeake Bay, and by doing that, the best way to do that is a resilient and healthy watershed. So most of our work happens up here in the watershed to ultimately improve the bay. We're very dedicated to involving as many of the 19-ish million residents of the watershed as we can. So whether they are fellow conservationists like us and like y'all here, whether they are just members of the public, business community, the government, everybody, we're pretty certain that every single entity and person needs to be involved, or else we're not going to be able to achieve our goals, because watershed restoration is inherently a group effort. So that is how we prefer to work, bringing people together, finding the gaps in existing resources, and trying to get it done. We have 4 main pillars of our work that are, a lot of them are really focused on impact. Rob and I are in the forest team, which is very focused on the ground impact restoration. We also have an agriculture team, which is in a very similar light, and we work very closely with them. And we also work closely with the green infrastructure team that does a lot of implementation. And then that kind of 4th pillar there, stewardship and engagement, is sort of the glue that keeps us all together. And it's also those efforts really focused on getting more of the watershed engaged in this work. We've been, again, this movement is over 50 years old. The Clean Water Act is over 50 years old at this point. We haven't met our goals yet. We haven't gotten to where we want to be. And we think that's because we still haven't involved enough of the people who live here and who are stakeholders here. No pun intended for our live staking workshop. So us on the forest team, we're very impact driven. So here's New. There we go. I like to include pictures of her because she is usually heard over the course of the presentation howling somewhere in my house. But she has settled down now, hopefully for good. What Rob and I do is we try to increase the quantity and the quality of forest cover in the Bay watershed. Another big part of that is increasing the stewardship for forest cover in the watershed. The more forested an area is, the better its water quality will be. This has been found over and over and over again all over the world. So we on the forest team really try to just improve the forest cover and increase the amount of forest cover we have to help get that done, make the whole landscape more resilient. So you'll be hearing from Rob and I here today. You'll be seeing photos of these other folks, and you'll probably be bumping into them at other things that you attend if you ever come to any of our events or get our newsletter or anything like that. We also have a couple team members like Jenna, who is kind of partially forest team, so I want to make sure that they give a shout out too. But these are all of our folks who are 100% forests. That matter of if you want to keep along with us, and we recommend that you do, there's a couple ways to do that. We have a couple newsletters. One is just for the Alliance generally, so that's the Confluence, pretty cool name for a water quality oriented organization, very focused on more of the Bay, big picture stuff, and kind of what we're doing as an organization. And then if you go to that newsletter, and I think Jenna at some point is going to drop the link to this newsletter page in the chat, so it'll be easier for you to find there. Yeah, if you want to hear about volunteer opportunities, events like this, all sorts of stuff, that main Confluence newsletter is great. If you're more interested in, or if you in addition to that newsletter, if you want to sign up for our Forest for the Bay newsletter, that is a monthly newsletter that is just focused on education around forests. So we do tree trivia. We have a phenology segment, which is kind of the life cycle changes of plants over the course of the year. Plants and fungi. We've been adding a couple fungi in lately. We churn out original articles, videos on educational stuff around forests. So if you like to learn about trees and forests, then that's a good place for you to do that once a month. We'll never ask you for money there or to come out to anything. It's just about teaching you. So yeah, hopefully you'll sign up for those. And then one more thing there on that note, so a lot of these species actually that we're going to talk about, if you're interested in learning more about them, we put out some video content. Everybody learns in different ways. Some people prefer to read articles. Some people like to come to presentations like this. Some people like to watch videos on their own. So we try to cover as much territory as we can there, and sort of meet people where they are. And sometimes it's hard to see some of these species. They can be hard to find, especially if you're a novice. So we like to try to make it easy for you. So Forest for the Bay on YouTube is how to find those. I do a monthly tree ID and natural history show, I guess, or I don't know, thing, series. And then our colleague Jim has done a couple now of habitats, which is focused more on wildlife habitat and chatting about it. So let's get in. We're done with the front matter there. This is what you are here to learn about, is live staking. So what is live staking? It's kind of a weird way. I wish there was a better term for it because it can get a little kind of confusing. But live staking is what it's called. It's basically propagation by cutting in the field, instead of taking cuttings, potting them up, growing them, nurturing them, then putting them in the field as containerized stock, which is something that we do with these species relatively frequently too. But you just take the cutting of certain species and you stick them in a wet enough area, and enough of them grow for this to be a super valuable way to increase your woody species cover. This is all the species that we're going to talk about. We're really focusing on woody species. There are a bunch of herbaceous species that have similar properties, and we'll kind of talk about the plant biology behind why and how this works. But something like, say, a goldenrod is a great example. It is basically like an angry root is all a goldenrod is. It's a root that has some above ground mass for a very relatively short part of the year. You could dig up that goldenrod root, put little chunks all over the place, and you'll get new goldenrods there, or milkweeds. There are other examples. Folks are very familiar with that in the garden. This is a super similar concept with woody species. And this could work in your garden context as long as you have the appropriate soils for that. Here, this picture in the bottom, I kind of like to include this because that was my Volkswagen Golf at the time, a coupe. And we would cram in, hundreds and hundreds of stakes in there. You don't need a pickup truck. You don't need specialized tools. You need pruners and a bucket, and a lot of fortitude to go out in the cold and do it and get potentially wet and muddy. And it is a really easy, low investment way to get things done. So we just want to mention now we're going to really focus on the live staking, but there are all sorts of parameters of live staking that work the exact same way and that you could do with the exact same species. And Rob and I, neither of us have actually done that. We've done a lot of live staking, but we've never tried these other things. We're going to be trying it this spring. So if we do this presentation next February, we'll have our own photos of these. We're going to do some trials at we did a planting at Millersville University here in Lancaster County. And so with their kind of ecology curriculum, we're going to do some trials, and the students are going to do some kind of research, learn statistics and that kind of thing while we're figuring out kind of what works best in different areas. So we're excited to try these out in the field. But for now, the Alaska Department of Game did a good job for us showing how these work. So brush mat is basically instead of just one stake, you have kind of a woven sort of mat or mattress of these species, of twigs of these species. And basically what you're doing there is instead of having a more linear or an individual stem that you're trying to restore this area with, and Rob will get into kind of the conservation ramifications of doing this, but you have a more, a lateral surface for more coverage. So that's great if you have a more of an intense erosion problem, those kind of things. If you're doing stream bank restoration, which is, pretty common here in the Bay watershed, we have a lot of severe erosion. Sometimes the best thing that you can do is, unfortunately, you have to bring in heavy machinery, do a little bit of excavation to start to reduce the erosion issues. But when you're backfilling, you can do things like this brush layering, where you're putting in live stakes into that fill to immediately stabilize it. Those roots will grow within a couple months of you putting it in there, and then you're going to have a much more stable bank than if you just grade it and then put some, matting on it to stop the erosion with plastic. A fascine or a wattle is another way to do this. So basically a tube-shaped bundle. This is also from the Alaska Department of Fish and Game, and I thought this was so wonderful. I wanted to share this. This was an elementary school, this photo on the right. They worked and did this. And so, again, this is a super easy thing to do. If, third graders can do this, you can too. And it does work quite well with very low investment. And then one more kind of thing, I think, I wanted to make sure I mentioned live staking is a big part of my life, big part of our kind of pre-planting season work that we do. And I have a couple shrubs in the backyard here that I've planted, partly to be able to pull live stakes from, but they're good for other things too. So, Rob's going to talk about exactly what parameters you're going to be cutting, but oftentimes you're not going to want to use the very, very slender branches, but we have other things we could do with them. So my lovely wife Allison there in the middle likes to make wreaths out of our sandbar willow or coyote willow, which is a shrub willow. So it has those little, pussy willow flowers there. So we, she doesn't sell them or anything. We just give them away to families and friends. And we always save our red osier dogwood and our silky dogwood cuttings, and we keep them potted in the house for a couple of months just for decoration. But you may have heard about the concept of multifunctional buffers or agroforestry, where you're kind of doing conservation, you're doing reforestation, but you're also, producing some income there too. And Rob and I were chatting about elderberry kind of as folks were coming into this. That is a great example. This is an excellent species to establish with live stakes, to spread around a site with live stakes. But it also has some kind of economic output potential if you're in the right place and you have that market figured out and you want to spend the time trying to make money. And of course, time is money. So what we do is we make these crafts and we give them away to friends and family. But if you wanted to make money or you are pitching conservation practices to farmers or other landowners, this is one aspect that you could mention. And it works really, really well, as we'll get into. So why does it work? I think it's important to understand kind of what's going on here, because that has important ramifications for how we are treating these stems and what exactly we're doing and where we're using them. So all of the species that can do this are specialists of riparian zones. Riparian area is an area along a stream or a wetland or a lake. It's basically adjacent to a water body. A lot of wetland species will do this too. And this adaptation to be able to, really intensively bring new growth in is an adaptation to frequent disturbance. So in the wetland area, especially prior to the last 200 years or so, there were beavers everywhere. So beavers would, and this is a site in Lancaster County here, a park planting that's doing really, really well. But beavers have moved into the stream and have started to take some trees away. So the species that they are taking are ones that we're going to talk about here today that you can do live staking with. And I don't think that's a coincidence. The beavers are not really bothering every tree. They're only taking things like black willow that will reestablish really well. So we're actually not super concerned. We're kind of happy the beavers are here. We're happy they're able to use our site because that black willow is going to turn into this explosion of brush in about 3 months. And so we know that black willow will be here for good. It's a way for it to survive. And then this photo here on the right is an elderberry. This is a riparian forest buffer site that we planted. And it got flooded out within just a couple months. And so this elderberry was trapped on the ground for, I don't know, maybe a month or so before I had time to get out to it. And it already started rooting into the ground where it had laid flat. Those are called adventitious roots. Those are roots that grow somewhere that is not typical root tissue. And typically these are in response to stress or environmental conditions changing. And of a great example of this that you may have more kind of contact with is tomatoes. They will do this, right? Tomatoes, they'll get real top heavy and then they'll fall over. And then you'll be kind of cleaning stuff up or harvesting tomatoes or something, and you'll notice that it kind of re-roots into the ground. Or canes of raspberry or something like that. That's another great example folks oftentimes have experience with. So these species are kind of primed to take a licking and keep on kicking. This is what they do to survive. If you think about how a plant lives, they are the base of the food chain, man. Everything wants to eat plant tissue, or everything lives on other things that eat plant tissue. And so they have to have these adaptations to be able to survive things eating them. So whether that's, regrowing leaves or regrowing stems after they get gobbled up or somehow damaged, this is how they survive and thrive on our landscape. But how does it work? So this seems very technical, but I promise it's really not that technical. I'm not that smart. If I can understand it, so can you. So I have made this graphic, this custom graphic here. I am not a textbook designer, so I hope this makes sense to everyone. I've kind of color-coded things. So there's 3 types of meristematic tissue in a plant, in a woody plant. Meristematic tissue is basically stem cell tissue. It is cells that have not yet been kind of programmed to be certain parts. They are there to become new growth. And so we have the apical meristem, which is right at the terminus, right at the kind of the apex bud, the terminal bud of a branch. And they are responsible for growing out further. Trees don't grow from the bottom up, they grow from the tips out. So if you hang a tire swing on a branch, it's not like that tire swing goes up higher over time, right? Because that branch doesn't grow up. It grows out. So, and that is the apical meristem is what's responsible for that. In blue here, we have the lateral meristem, and that's responsible for growing that diameter of a tree. All woody plants, most of their living tissue is just right inside the bark. Just a couple layers of cells inside the bark. That bark is 1 layer or 2 layers or 3 layers of dead cells, and they're kind of pushing out and they're pushing in. And there's just a very narrow band of living tissue. Part of that living tissue is the lateral meristem, because it has to become either conductor cells for water, for sugars, or it has to become dead wood, or it has to become, new bark. So it is growing, outwards. And then probably most important for live staking is what's called the intercalary meristem. The point of buds on a stem is called the node. You may have heard of it, the node of growth. And there's a lot of meristematic tissue there in the buds, because they are responsible for not only the buds, but growing the new stems, growing new leaves, growing fruits. So there is a lot of meristematic tissue there too. So what happens when we're doing live staking is we are removing the apical meristem, which also has a ton of auxins, which are plant growth hormones, and they're responsible for some other things too. They really program growth. All of these species are really, really high in auxins. You may have heard that black willow, you can grind it down and you can use it to root cuttings from plants like garden plants, roses and those kind of things that don't have this propensity to reestablish from, cuttings as much. You can grind down the tissue of these plants that have so much of this chemical in there, they can help other plants do the rooting. So the plants responsible for that are auxins, AUX. Oh, there I have it in the slide, AUXIN. So when we remove that apical meristem, when we behead that stem, now we are redistributing the auxin concentration in this stem. And so coupled with burying a significant portion of the stem into the ground, we are both redistributing the auxin and we're changing the environmental conditions. So what we're going to get is we are going to get new shoots growing out of those buds that are above ground, and then we're going to get new roots growing primarily for most species out of the nodes there, the intercalary meristems, but you'll also get some roots, especially in certain species, growing out of other places, growing out of lenticels, growing out of just from that lateral meristem tissue right underneath the bark. So this is how this works. And again, maybe this is overkill. Maybe this doesn't really matter, but I think this is important because if you understand how this works, you'll avoid some issues that people get into, and then they get frustrated that their lives-taking effort didn't take very well. But it might be because they left that terminal bud on and they didn't remove the apical meristem tissue. I see people do that quite a bit. So make sure that you follow Rob's instructions that he gives you here in a little bit, and things will go well. So there are really only a few species that are going to do this really, really well. There are a bunch of species that can do it okay. The two top tree species that I have used have been box elder and black willow. Again, these are floodplain specialist species. You're really only going to find these in nature near creeks or in the floodplain otherwise. And then a lot of people cite these species as being good to establish with live stake, especially cottonwood. But I have never tried it, so I wanted to be clear there that if you try this out, that's an awesome experimentation. But I can't say whether or not that I've seen it work. Little asterisk there for species that we do have tree talks on. So if you want to learn the identification of them, that's how to do it, because I'm going to show a couple photos and stuff, but this is mostly just for big picture. I'm not going to be able to teach you how to ID these trees just from this webinar here. So here are those species. There on the left is black willow, Salix nigra, behind the dog. The dog crossed the creek, took a picture of it, and then turned out that was a really perfect picture of black willow because that is often what they look like. That is their kind of primary growth form. They're typically growing out in the open, and they are gluttons for sunlight. They are reaching out wide, and they have a very round crown. This also may be because it got damaged by something 25 years ago. Maybe this got chewed down by a beaver, and that's why it resprouted like that. Probably not knowing this stream in Lancaster County, but still pretty cool. And then on the right there, this is actually a screenshot from the tree talk, because box elders are kind of weird looking trees that are sort of hard to take a photo of that really represent the cool species well. But they have very distinctive green colored stems, and the leaf scar, I don't know if you can see my mouse, the leaf scar meets in the middle of the stem. So this is a nice size stem for live staking. And yeah, Rob and I and our team took some box elder live stakes last year, and they established really, really well. So this is one I don't often see on lists, but we had really good experience with it in the field. So shrubs are kind of the real workhorses of live staking. And not only are they really good at establishing from live stakes, but they're really important ecologically in our forests. And they can really help with some of the erosion issues that you may be trying to solve with live staking, which Rob will get into kind of the conservation parameters for this technique. But a lot of stuff online says that this top category of species are some of the best. This is what we have also seen, doing really well. So not just red osier dogwood, but also silky dogwood and gray dogwood will establish well here, but they're kind of hard to tell apart at most of the year, especially the time of year when we're taking cuttings. So sometimes we'll just kind of bundle them as shrub dogwoods, or we'll abbreviate that further, but with shrub dogs. But sandbar willow, which I showed those wreaths made out of, it's called coyote willow in the Southwest. That's actually what I learned it as, but it's called sandbar willow, this subspecies out here in the East. It is our most abundant shrub willow species in North America. Pussy willow, another super abundant willow species, but it's a little bit more northerly in nature, so kind of more up into New England and sort of the Great Lakes states is where you'll see it, but it will establish pretty well down here. Elderberry is a great one too. I'm not sure if Rob's going to get into it, so I'll make sure I say it. One problem with elderberry is that it is very snappy. It will, those stems will break pretty easily. So when you're putting pressure on them to get them into the ground, they can break pretty readily, but we have found that they are monsters. They really want to survive. They are also just kind of angry roots is basically a good way to describe an elderberry. So they respond very well to live staking. One that you may not have really even seen in nature, but I love this species. It's such a wonderful species, swamp rose, Rosa palustris. That one does really well with live staking too. And we have some that I took from a site. We were doing some live staking, and I saved some of those the twigs on the ends, and I potted them up, and they did really well. And I think I have a picture here in a little bit, but now they're just growing in my yard. I planted them after they got established in the pots, and they're doing really well. And I don't have a super wet yard even, so they just, again, they want to live. Ones that they will do it, but not, I wouldn't fill an entire bucket necessarily with these species. Great to include, but yeah, again, it's not going to be your workhorse sort of species. Alders, both smooth and serrated alder will do it. And we just put out a tree talk on that last month. Arrowwood viburnum, buttonbush, winterberry are great species. I've seen all of those work, but again, they're not going to be your workhorses necessarily. So just good to include there for diversity. And then I see these cited a lot, 9-bark spicebush and highbush blueberry, but we've never tried them out yet either. So maybe you can and let us know. So quick photos here of these species. Again, I'm not going to be able to teach you here, but just to give you some context. This is from our live stake harvest that we did as a team last year in early March. It was so cold that there was more ice on the stems than there was actual stem tissue. But this is probably also a thing that live stake, these adaptations that allow these species to be live staked. This is probably another good reason to do this. They all have, most of them have very bendy stems that might snap under pressure of ice. And if they snap off, well, they can just, resprout pretty easily because of this very high auxin concentration. And then elderberries, Sambucus canadensis, there on the right. And yeah, Rob and I were kind of chatting as folks were trickling in about how you typically don't see this many berries on elderberry because the birds love them so much. Here is a live stake that we cut several years back, and you can see, so we had it soaking in a bucket of water. You can see the roots are starting to erupt out of those lenticels, which are gas exchange pores, and it's resprouting already, even before we staked it in the ground. So again, elderberry just really wants to live. There's our cute little swamp rose, Rosa palustris, beautiful pink flowers. Our native roses mostly they will concentrate their flowers at the tips of stems rather than multiflora rose, which is multiple flowers. The flowers are all over the stem with multiflora rose. A couple of different ways to make sure that you have a swamp rose or multiflora rose or other rose too. We have a couple other rose species, native rose species that I recommend looking into. They are pretty easy to tell the difference. And really, our multiflora roses, I think a lot of y'all might be familiar with those. They have very arching stems. Most of our native roses have very erect stems, so just different growth form, different prickles, different leaves, everything, and flowers, as you can see there. And then on the right, there's my little coyote willow patch. It is, if I could turn back time, if I could do things a little differently, I wouldn't have planted it right there because I didn't expect it to be as robust as it is. But they are probably 15 feet tall, and I cut them back to the ground every year. They just want to live. They're very brushy, so I have to restrict them with a lot of ropes through the growing season, but they also make a very nice privacy hedge in between my neighbor's yard and I. Like our neighbors, but it's good to have a little bit of privacy too in the backyard. Of course, buttonbush, you'll mostly notice it here when it has these golf balls shaped and sized and looking flowers. It's a really lovely plant, great hummingbird plant. And I've seen it do okay with live staking. We have a couple at our office, actually, which is right on a stream. And I think there's some photos of that later. But we have some that are doing well there. But again, they're not going to be your workhorse. Same with Arrowwood viburnum, loves wet areas and responds pretty well to live staking, but it's not a superstar necessarily. And then one more in this category, winterberry holly, Ilex deciduous, really beautiful tree, and it will establish from live stakes too. But I've only seen it do okay. Unfortunately, it's not like elderberry that 75% or more will establish, or black willow for that matter. Okay, so now I am gonna shut my trap here, and it's on to Rob Frank to finish us out here to talk about how to do it, where to do it, and so on and so forth. So over to you, Rob.
All right, thank you, Ryan. Yeah, I love hearing the background on that. There's so much of that chemistry, that biological magic going on in the background. It just kind of makes it all the more sweet to watch it work. But I'm here to talk about the nitty gritty of it, the applications for the live staking. Really, it's a bang for your buck sort of practice that you can put in place. So if you can find the place to harvest, you can find a source for your plantings. And that's probably the selling point that I would do for this if I was trying to convince people for that. So, write that down if you're convinced. But what does it do? So there's some areas where you'll have very eroded stream banks, places that are prone to flooding. You want to get vegetation in there. And sometimes in those sort of high risk environments, you don't necessarily want to take the risk of putting in a tree that's going to be a drag once the floods come, once those erosion events happen. So this is a great way to get your vegetation in there. Why are we increasing the vegetation? So the vegetation, number one, for the wildlife, it's going to increase the habitat for the wildlife. You're going to have more food sources. All the ones that we talked about in this one are your native plants. So your native animals, insects, birds, mammals, fish, they're going to enjoy having these plants in the riparian area. So another reason is you're getting those, as you see in that picture, it's right next to the stream. That will eventually shade out the stream. If you're a trout fisherman, you know that a cold water stream has a higher oxygen content, and that's better for the fish. So the shadier stream is a happier fish stream. In addition to that, all these plants that we're putting next to the stream, again, they're native plants. That feeds the bugs that are in the stream. You feed the bugs, you feed the fish, more fish. Hopefully I'm getting the attention of the fishermen out there. Come out to our events for these. Another reason, stream bank stabilization. We talked about the stream restoration that goes on. You're getting the heavy equipment in there that's going to turn up all the soil, disturbing a lot of things. This is going to be a way to get some roots into that disturbed surface. You'll hear a lot about sediment banks. You can get a live stake in there and it'll start to put out roots in there, stabilizing that soil, locking that sediment in place before it gets into the water. In addition to that, these are multi-stemmed plants, a lot of them. They're very rooty, they're spreading out, they're forming thickets. That's going to add another layer of armor to the bank. It's going to cut down on those erosive forces when those floodwaters come through, slows it down. Sediment going to drop out of the water stream and stay there on the banks where it belongs. Then it's just more stuff for the stakes to grow in. If it piles up on these stakes, if it buries the branches, as we see, they'll put out those adventive roots there to try to just stay up there. It's a great thing for that. It's enhancing the riparian buffer. We are planting as close to the stream as we can, but again, there's at-risk areas, there's places that are just wet where some of these things, it's not going to be the happiest spot for them. We might as well throw a dozen live stakes in that area and see if we can't get a good thicket of willows or dogwoods, elderberries popping up in there. And it's a great way to get even more vegetation on the stream banks. Give me a slide forward here. So this is a stream restoration that happened in 2016. If you look up on that bank, you will see white pine if you've got pine vision like I do. And then on the right, it's also there. That is about a 15-foot bank. You can see that a log mudsill was put in there. So on top of that log mudsill, it would be hard for you to dig a hole and plant a tree. but you can put a couple hundred live stakes in there, and that's what we did. Willows popped up. You can see on the right there, that's 4 years later. That was March 2016. The restoration was completed the previous fall. Put in those live stakes. 4 years later, you have a thicket of willows. You can't even see that high bank there. It was just a great way to get some trees in there, stabilize that stream bank, and give it a little bit more of resistance to the floods that happen in that area. All right, let's bump me forward again. So we're going to talk about the harvesting here. You're going to do this during the dormant season. It's a dormant season now. It depends on when you're going to use the stakes, but you can harvest them anytime during the dormant season. It's better to harvest them closer to when you're going to use them, because there is less care that you would need to use to keep them going. So for us, we don't have a refrigerator. I'll get into that, but that's something you might need if you're going to keep them for a very long time. You cut them. We're looking for about an 18-inch thing, an 18-inch stake. Why 18 inches? You want to have enough of the plant material there that has energy in it that it uses to grow. If you cut it too short, we notice that the smaller ones don't seem to do as well. And the longer ones, they're harder to get into the ground because you want to have them go in about 2/3, 3/4 in there. You have a little bit above the soil for a node. I am getting a little bit ahead of myself there, but you can see on that diagram on the right, most of that stake will go into the ground. And you'll notice the bottom, there's that diagonal cut. Why are we doing the diagonal cut? You're pushing into the ground. It really helps it get down in there. Reduces some of the damage that you might do during the part of driving into the ground. Another thing you want to keep in mind is once you have identified your shrub for harvest, make sure, or tree, you might get a little bit too enthusiastic about trimming it. Now, a lot of these species, as Ryan covered, they do recover from these damaging events. That is part of their survival strategy, but it's best not to take too much from them. Use your best judgment, but I try to say like 30%, 40%. You can go higher depending on how much you want to do it. I mean, some of them are just very aggressive species, but it also depends on where you're harvesting it from. If this is your own property, go nuts. If it's somebody else's, please be respectful of what their rules might be. Because we do have some places we go that don't belong to us, and those are some things we have to keep in mind. Let's bump it one more. Now we've cut our stakes. How are we going to get them out? It's very technical. Put them in a bucket, fill with water, take them out of there. You're keeping them moist. It should be during the time of year that things are cool. It's been warming up. Maybe a little bit sooner. So keep that in mind. Again, we like to try to harvest them as close as we're trying to put them into the ground. It's just things degrade over time. So bear that in mind. Trim them back, keep them moist. If you are going to keep them for longer, consider using a medium. I've seen wet paper used, so newspaper type paper, mulch, rice hulls, wood chips. Those things tend to keep the moisture in, trying to keep them from drying out in the cold and the wind. Let's go one more forward. Got into the fun part, installing them. Again, we want to put them about 2/3 to 3/4 of the stake into the ground. You want to have it perpendicular to the soil surface, 90 degrees to the soil surface. That gives the roots the lateral growth that they want to have. So put them down there. The point that you made when you harvested it, now it's coming to play. You don't want to cut it later, right before you put it in. You can do that, but it's best to cut it there so that you know that you have it point down. You're putting it point down in the bucket, but you spill the bucket, you didn't know which way was up. It can be hard to tell. I'd probably just show it to Ryan and he would tell me, and then tell me not to spill the bucket again. But that's why we're cutting that slant in there when we first trim it. You're going to your stream bank, you're trying to put them in there by your pond, drive them in the soil. Soil's too hard. What am I going to do? There are ways to get around that. We have live stake drivers. Some of them are very advanced. We have some that are welded together that have a handle and all that, but it's basically a piece of rebar or metal that you can drive into the soil, make a little pilot hole, and that helps guide it down in there. You don't want to have too big of a hole because you want to make sure you have good soil contact with the stake as it goes in there. That's got to be important for it to grow. Again, you're going to run into some resistance because you're driving a stake into the ground. And how do you normally drive a stake into the ground? With a mallet. So we use a rubber mallet. You don't want to do too much damage to it. You don't want to get too overzealous with it because it will break the stakes. It will damage them. There is a shock that you're putting into it. So try to be gentle. It's a little bit of a balance. Ryan mentioned earlier, elderberry. So yeah, some of them do break. I've broken live stakes, and it's not just because I'm extremely powerful. It's just because you're trying to get them in there. There's rocks. There's sometimes hard clay. It's going to get in the way. So be patient. Drive them in there. You find a spot where you can't drive your stake into the ground, you can move a little bit to the side. And speaking of that, so when you are putting these in the ground, there was a slide earlier in the presentation that showed a little bit about this, but you kind of do alternating triangles or a WM pattern. Give them a little bit of a spacing. About 3 feet apart is what I've usually done. And that just covers the bank, gets those plants in there so they can form the clusters that they like to grow in. If you find some of these multi-stem species out there, they're growing in thickets with lots of stems popping up. So they're going to grow in there. They're going to put out the roots. They're going to get everything stabilized, and that's how they're going to like it. In this picture, I think, was that my third day on the job there? I'm up on the bank with Rebecca and Michael, putting some live stakes in there right by our office. So let's do one bump here. And on the right there, you can see that these stakes do grow in. They within one season, they'll start to push some growth. Typically, that first season is more focused on root growth, but those nodes there above the soil, so they are going to push out some vegetative growth, which you're going to need to, because that's how they make their energy. And that's what I got for you. So we'd like to extend the opportunity to learn with us in the field, February 25th, Lidditz, 10 to noon. You can sign up for that on our website, the events page. It's right there on the screen. We will also send that out to you, but you can just navigate over there for Alliance events, and that'll get you there. Also, we got one in Maryland there, 9 to 11. That'll be with Zach. So look for him. And March 4th in Stewartstown. So we got 2 in PA and 1 in Maryland. Next slide here. And again, sign up for our newsletters. As we go along through our seasons, we'll add other things in for our volunteer base. You can learn more about it as they happen. Some things pop up. We will have maintenance days and other things like that. Those are opportunities to see the work we've done out in the field, maybe see some live stakes, maybe see some tree planting, see what an established buffer looks like. Plus, we'd love to have you out at the other events and keep learning with you. We have a big, I think we're up to 13 plantings in Pennsylvania for volunteers this year. And we're going to put in total, I think, over 300 acres this year. So that's not all volunteer. We're not making you do 300 acres, but you can come out and be a part of putting in 300 acres this spring. And we'd love to have you out. I get a lot out of seeing people here, and I've seen some familiar names in the attendance list. So I'll be looking for you. And again, if you want to reach out, there we are, and the other members of Pennsylvania are standing on either side of the is that the Silverado or is that the Ranger? Yes,
The Silverado.
the Silverado. Yeah, that's before my time. I wasn't there for that harvest because it looks cold. Well, I'm glad I missed it. Now I'll go out I love working out in the snow. So yeah, reach out for us with any questions. We'll have some resources to send out to you, and we hope to see you at some of those harvesting events.
Yeah, thanks, Rob. I'm going to jump in. There's some great questions here. So we've got some people who are really on it, really sharp. So Leslie Erickson asked, which stakes are better for shady stream banks? In my experience, silky dogwood is what I find in the woods more, in a little bit more shade. So that was one of the ones that we'll kind of bundle in sometimes at shrub dogwoods. It can look very similar to red osier dogwood, but it has kind of more of a greenish, purplish color. And red elderberry, I don't know if it propagates well with live stakes, but I see that in the shade in the woods. It's kind of more of it's not as aggressive as our, Sambucus canadensis, but red elderberry does well in the shade. I don't know if it does well by live stakes though. And on that note, Misha John, I hope I didn't ruin that, but asked about vendor recommendations. So I would recommend just Googling, live stakes. Ernst Conservation Seeds sells a lot. We're not, recommending them per se, but they do have a lot of options. And some of our contractors ultimately, source from them. So we have sometimes contractors will do this as part of the bigger planting, although it is free. It takes a lot of time for us to go out and cut all these things. So sometimes it's good to just pay folks to do it. But I know there are a lot of small nurseries around that'll sell cuttings, and then there's those bigger guys too.
Octorero is one that I've gotten live stakes from before. So they had a number of species selections. That one that was in the presentation was with Octorero stakes. So
awesome. Or my backyard. No, just kidding. Don't. They're for me and me alone. Yeah, that's right, Anna. Octorero. And so that is in southern Lancaster County. So if you're in the mid Maryland to mid PA sort of region, then that could be good for you. And then Craig dropped there the mid-Atlantic native plants too, and Virginia has them. So there was also another question about species. We like to cram in as much species diversity as possible always, because it's maybe it's lazy. We don't know what's going to do well places, so we don't want to have to keep coming back and replanting. So we try to mix things up and see what sticks. Also, that's kind of a nice way to make sure we're maximizing our vegetative diversity, which will maximize our our faunal diversity too. But it does kind of depend. You want to take a look at your your site conditions, like someone asked about the shade. Willows don't do great in heavy shade, but they'll do well in okay and dappled shade, those kind of things. But yeah, we like to kind of really mix them up. And then I was going to pass that question to you, Rob, about the when you're doing it on a slope. If if the slope is like this, do you do it up 90 degrees to like the ground, or do you do it and so as Zach, our teammate in Maryland, answered, just perpendicular is ideal, because if you're getting a flood, it's going to be less likely to rip out. So let's see here. Yeah, and if anyone wants to ask any questions, unmute and ask. You can go ahead and do it too. We have a couple more minutes here. And yeah, we're happy to chat live stakes.
I had a question. I was talking to somebody recently who cut really long stakes for just getting shade for animals a little bit faster. What do you think about that? Like even like a 8-foot stake. I mean, you wouldn't be able to do 2/3 of it underground, right? So how effective would that be?
I think it probably depends on the species. If it's a willow, it might actually not. They're so tough, they might do okay. But it is really important to get as much in there as you can, because kind of, if you think about it, it's sort of like they don't have any way to absorb nutrients. They don't have any roots. We're sticking them in there without any way to get nutrients or water or anything, you know. So so the more that's buried underground, the better contact you're going to be able to get, and you know, the better nutrition you're going to be able to get. But again, I think it's worth to try with, especially a black willow. You know, they are kind of the king of live staking. You know, they probably over 75% of them take in the right conditions. So it's worth a try, and let us know how it goes, because it would be kind of good to, you know, have a tree that's already 5 feet tall once you stick it in. But also, kind of other hand there, if you put it in, it'll probably be 5 feet tall in about a year. So, you know, depends. You could take that 8-footer, cut it up into 5 live stakes, and then you have 5, you know, trees in a year. So, and one other thing that I don't know if either of us mentioned, but that kind of reminds me, you know, if y'all have been at any of our tree plantings, our kind of classic tree plantings, we always put on deer protection. It is a necessary thing to do here in the Mid-Atlantic in most places. With live stakes, we're just kind of gambling. We're putting so much mass out there that it's kind of okay if the deer take a bunch of them. And so Rob was talking about that grid, that kind of triangular grid covers a lot of area. If deer come in and hammer these things, if they hit them really bad in year 1, a lot of them might not make it, but by year 2, they're used to this constant disturbance, so they can actually handle that browse pretty well. So we put so much mass out there that we're just kind of hoping that if the deer come by, they'll take a few, the rest will survive, and then be able to handle that browsing into the future. So no need to use tube shelters for once. It's great. But yeah, we recommend you try this out. Like anything with conservation, the best, you only fail if you stop trying. So, you know, try it out, and if the species you took don't work, try a slightly different, you know, spot, or a slightly different techniques or storage, or, you know, try to figure out what you did wrong, or maybe you did everything right and it was random chance. That happens a lot to us, you know, because that's the nature of conservation. So so yeah, get out there, try it out, and let us know how it goes. We'd love to hear back from you, especially Rob. Email Rob if you have any questions, not me. Just kidding, we're both here and happy to respond. But great. Yeah, anything else here? And yeah, definitely hope some of y'all come out in person. We're going to concentrate. We're going to show everyone how to do both the harvesting and the installation at all of those events. But some of them will be a little bit more concentrated towards either harvesting or installation, depending on what the needs are of the site there. So we're lucky that we have those sites with friendly landowners who are happy to have us come in here and do this. And also they have both needs of harvesting and installation. But yeah, we'll give folks another maybe minute here if anyone has any more questions, and otherwise have good lunches. And there we go. Yeah, so one question just trickled in about the deer protection. Yeah, well, actually, it's interesting. So I just said we don't use tubes on live stakes. One thing that we have started to do is actually, when we're replanting trees in relatively wet sites, rather than digging a hole and putting in a seedling and the normal thing, we just stick in a live stake, lift up the shelter, put in a live stake, put the shelter back down, and it's had really good results so far. It's saving us a ton of time and effort. I mean, you can carry 100 stems in a bucket easily, and, you know, containerized seedlings, you can carry 25 on your shoulder and it hurts. So yeah, we have experimented with sheltering live steaks, and does even better when they're sheltered than they do out in the open. But we typically are investing more in the quantity to handle the potential for deer browse, the likelihood of deer browse, I should say. Yeah, for sure. Cool. All right. Well, anything else, Rob? Any words of wisdom to leave our steak happy crowd here?
No, I mean, you basically covered it. I would love people to just try to just try this practice. You try it on your own property, try it in your places where you do have tree plantings, or come out with us. We'll be happy to have you, happy to show you how it's done. Stick some sticks in the mud with us.
Cool. All right. Perfect way to leave it. Thanks, everybody. Have a good rest of your week, a good rest of your days, and tell your friends if they missed this that we're doing another one tomorrow night at 5:30 for the after hour, the happy hour crowd. Or no, 6 to 7, right? Tomorrow evening. Check the links that Jenna put in.
6 to 7.
There we go. Yeah. And well, still, it's happy hour. If Rob and I are there, it's happy hour. So. All right. Wonderful, folks. Take care. Thank you. Happy staking season.